Hey, good evening, everyone. I'd like to reconvene our meeting and call the regular meeting to order. And I'd like to ask Ms. Danelle West to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, welcome, everyone. Good evening again. This is a meeting of the Kent School District Board, which is held in public to comply with the Open Public Meetings Act. Just wanted to let everybody know, tonight I will need to leave early to go to the airport, and Vice President Strauss will be leading the meeting at around 9 o'clock until I return 2 weeks from now. So I want to read a little bit about the process for audience participation. The purpose of the board meetings is for the board to conduct its business in public, not to provide a public forum. During the meeting, the board will listen to but not respond to comments from visitors. Those wishing to comment must complete a comment card and give it to the board secretary before the meeting begins, or no later than the agenda item 3.0 in the presentations. Abusive public comments personally directed towards staff members will not be tolerated. We ask you refrain from mentioning anyone's particular name, please. And when it is your turn to address the board, please state your name at the start of your testimony. Please limit your remarks to 3 minutes. You will hear a timer when the 3 minutes are up. And visitors who have completed a comment card indicating a desire to speak to an agenda item will be called at that portion of the agenda. For board procedure, written material to provide board members with background information should be submitted to the superintendent's office at least 1 week in advance of the meeting. So at this time, Dr. Watts, I'd like to ask if there are any changes to our agenda, please.
I apologize. Thank you. Thank you, President Beged Aslam, members of the board. Please note that a supplemental personnel report was added to the consent agenda, and a copy is before you on the dais.
All right. So at this time, I'd like to ask a board member to make a motion.
I move that we add the supplemental personnel report to the consent agenda.
All right. Is there a second?
Second that.
All right. We will now, a motion has been made to approve the supplemental personnel report. Are there any discussions or questions? Hearing none, I'm calling for the vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. Motion passes. All right. We are going to be reading some proclamations tonight, 3 proclamations, and after the proclamations, we'd like to ask everyone stay for a photo opportunity, please. So the first is our American Educations Week, and I'd like to ask Director Strauss to read the proclamation for American Education Week.
Thank you. Whereas public education is the backbone of our democracy, providing young people with the tools they need to maintain our nation's precious values of freedom, civility, equality, and whereas equipping young students with both academic and social growth, schools give them hope and equitable access to a productive future. And whereas public employees, be they teachers, guest teachers, higher education faculty and staff, custodians, administrators, bus drivers, clerical staff, food service professionals, skilled trades workers, health and student service workers, security guards, technical employees, librarians, educational support professionals, or other support staff work tirelessly to serve our children and communities with care and professionalism. And whereas public schools are the foundation of neighborhoods and communities, bringing together parents and children, educators and volunteers, business leaders and elected officials in a common purpose, now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Directors of the Kent School District proclaims the week of November 12th through the 16th, 2018 as American Education Week in the Kent School District and urges all citizens to join in this observation.
Thank you. At this time, we'd like to ask all the educators in the audience to stand, please, to accept the proclamation. Thank you. Next, we'd like to call on Director Hardy to read the proclamation for the National Education Support Professionals Day, please.
Yes. Whereas public schools are the backbone of our democracy, providing young people with the tools they need to maintain our nation's precious values of freedom, civility, and equality. And whereas education support professionals are integral to the education process, and whereas education support professionals provide a safe and healthy learning environment for students, and whereas education support professionals work tirelessly to serve our children and communities with care and professionalism, now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Directors of the Kent School District proclaims today, November 14th, 2018, as National Education Support Professionals Day in the Kent School District, and urges all citizens to join in this observance.
Thank you. I would like to invite Karen Flick to accept the proclamation, please. Yes. To the podium. If you'd like to say a few words, that would be great as well. Thank you. No, you don't have to. That's all right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I just want to say that paraeducators are often underappreciated, but I can't tell you how many great stories I've heard of support from teachers and everything like that. So please don't forget paraeducators. We work really hard and we love our kids.
Thank you. All right. The Kent School District is committed to the success of every student, family, and staff in each of its schools. Learning and work environments are enriched and improved by the contributions, perspectives, and the very presence of diverse participants. To that end, we have a cultural heritage celebration this month. We want to recognize with a proclamation. While we will not single out any one person or group of people to represent their entire race or culture to receive this proclamation, we do believe that it is important to take these opportunities for celebration and recognition as we work to create a learning environment that is respectful, welcoming, and inclusive for every student, family, and staff, and in which their diversity is valued and contributes to their success. With that, we'd like to have Director DeBruler read the proclamation for the National Native American Heritage Month, please.
Thank you. Whereas the history and culture of our great nation have been significantly influenced by American Indians and indigenous peoples, and whereas the contributions of American Indians have enhanced the freedom, prosperity, and greatness of America today, and whereas their customs and traditions are respected and celebrated as part of a rich legacy throughout the United States, and whereas Native American Awareness Week began in 1976 and recognition was expanded by Congress and approved by President George H. Bush in August 1990, designating the month of November as National American Indian Heritage Month. Proclamations under variants of the name including Native American Heritage Month and National American Indian and Alaska Native Heritage Month have been issued each year since 1994. And whereas in honor of National Native American Heritage Month, community celebrations as well as numerous cultural, artistic, educational, and historical activities have been planned. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Directors of the Kent School District proclaims the month of November as National Native American Heritage Month in the Kent School District and urges all citizens to join in this observance.
Thank you. So we would like to ask the educators who'd like to come for a photo op at this time. Some of us. Educators, and then our support professionals, please. did. Okay, we are moving on to our presentation, but before we do, we have a card from Donna Parag to speak to the budget. So Donna, to the podium to my right, please, 3 minutes. And
I expected to have to wait much longer into the evening. Thank you, members of the board. I speak directly to you tonight. For those who do not know me, my name is Donna Parag. I'm currently a teacher librarian in Northwood Middle School. I started out at Scenic Hill. I opened Emerald Park as the library media specialist. I have been a teacher on special assignment for technology and library. I have received a state award for leading a librarian team in the development of our CAM. I've worked for IT on the one-to-one program for 2 years. I have a lot of varied experience in different departments and background with different functions across the district in 22 years. I am here tonight to say how appalled I personally am at the direction of our district right now. The explanation I hope that is forthcoming about not meeting budget expectations needs to be adequate for the thinking voters in our district. If we ever expect to pass another bond or levy, things need to change in our district. One thing I helped put into place while I was working for IT was the protocol for software purchases. It addressed such issues as, what are the needs? What other products do we own that may help? What are all available products and their prices? Which one is the best fit at the lowest cost with our existing systems and resources? You board members are in a critical place at a critical time in the Kent School District. We hope you are asking the right questions of all stakeholders. It is the district, like for instance, is the district following their own software protocols for purchases? Or are people circumventing the process? Could we have avoided hundreds of thousands of dollars in Let's Talk, the costs that we had to purchase the system and to also buy out the contract when we ditched it? Or when we purchased Peach Jar, which duplicates Skyward. Where are these expenses then recovered from? May I suggest it seems to come from our school budgets. Why are school budgets cut so much? I am down to $910 a year for library books and resources, and I can only get $310 of that between September 1st and January 30th. And then I get the last installment in April. That's not very many books during the year. It impacts students directly, their motivation to use the library and to read. 2 years ago, the state tasked board members with distributing increased MSOC money, including a suggested $20 per student to the libraries. Why was the district personnel who catalogs books riffed in April with no plan for job function replacements? The district just this month, November, gave release time to 2 librarians so that they could help cover the backlog. 2 months to get a book from purchased to a kid to read is unacceptable. I have a lot more questions. I hope somebody approaches me and asks about them. But these are difficult questions with difficult answers. But this is your job. We hope that you do it. Thank you.
thank you. Now, at this time, I'd like to ask Mr. Ben Rarick and Lisa Tyler to present and answer questions on the budget update, 2017-18 budget update.
Good evening. Going to try to balance a binder and go through this at the same time here. Okay, so it's my pleasure to present the year-end results from 17-18. Lots on the agenda today. Some of it's forward-looking, some of it's backward-looking. This is just the year close 17-18. I'll look at ending fund balances, both total and unreserved undesignated. Look at it in the context of the four-year outlook that we've been kind of talking about over the last year. I'll show expenditures by program and by object, as well as year-to-year comparisons for revenues and expenditures. We'll look at enrollment and staffing. We'll look at other funds, and finally, we'll do a bond rating update. Okay, so the first slide is the fund balance slide that I think you've seen before, at least in structure. Couple things to note here. First of all, a tiny positive fund balance for 17-18, but you'll see on line 890 that the unassigned fund balance is much smaller than we anticipated, and the 821 line, which is restricted for carryover restricted revenues, is much larger than we anticipated. So what's going on there? A lot of LAP. We got more LAP than we anticipated. That shows up as a carry forward, but it's restricted. Okay, so that shows up. That's most of the $2.5 million you're going to see there. And so remember, when we're thinking about your 5% fund balance goal, you're really more concerned with that negative 4.8 number than you are with that infinitesimal small number. That's the number you want to be 5%. Okay, so to see that in the context of the peaks and valleys charts that you've seen in months previous, what's noteworthy here is that the red line, the maroon, I guess it is really the only line for the last 5 years that actually breaks the pattern. It starts the lowest, and then in the middle of the year, it surpasses the revenue pattern for 16-17, and then ultimately ends just short of 15-16. So that means essentially that you're going from a structural deficit spending situation to a situation where you're spending less than you take in, which is exactly what you want to have happen. Okay, so in the context, this fund balance in the context of a four-year outlook, I really feel strongly that I wanted this slide up in front because it only gets harder from here. Remember our conversations about this kind of two-year step down in our local levy and the challenges that presents for 1920 and 2021. So could you please look at three numbers here? The first would be that right now, and again, I'll take a moment to say that people have different philosophies about these outlooks. Some people only show an outlook that is balanced at the end because under the theory that they have a plan to get there. Other people have a philosophy that you want to, the purpose of the outlook is to compel action. So this is an outlook that basically assumes no further action. So here's kind of where we think you'd end up if the laws stay the same, if we get the amount of revenue that we anticipate getting, if expenditures go in the direction we think they will go. And so three numbers to take a look at here. Number one is projecting a very small unreserved undesignated fund balance, not at the end of this year, but at the end of next year, 1920, after the levy step down. Number two, probably the most significant number on the slide. You see that negative $11.1 million under the 1920 column? Okay. That means that, again, barring any major change, with the revenues we think we're going to get, with the expenditure pattern we're on, we would be in deficit spending again in 1920, which means that for the 1920 budget cycle, again, a lot of important decisions to make given declining revenue, et cetera. Okay, so it continues to be, we have a small 6-month reprieve, and then we go right back into a budget year that is equally as challenging. Okay. Next few slides are going to show total expenditures and total revenues both by program and year to year. Okay. Couple numbers to look at here. remember you started the year with an adopted budget, and then you did a kind of an informal revised. You didn't send it to the state. You didn't formally do that, but that was kind of your planning document. So you were within 0.24% on the expenditure side for your revised budget. Okay, $805,000 more than anticipated, but still nearly $7 less than your formally adopted budget. Okay. As you can see, line by line, you've got some offsetting things going on, okay? So year-to-date expenditures were less in basic education, but they were more in a couple programs. One was inclusive education, okay? One of the dynamics there is, catching up with the costs of out-of-district placements. Those are necessary expenses, but they're also expensive, and they were more than anticipated. You see in the 5,000 and 6,000 series there under compensatory education, that shows as negative 2.9 million. What you'll see is we actually ended up collecting a lot more than we anticipated as well. So we didn't spend more than we collected, but we spent more than we budgeted, if that makes sense. Okay. Okay, biggest part of expenditures, staffing. So here is an overlay of certificated and classified staff summaries. This is a budget to actual display. Three numbers to probably look at here. The first being that on the bottom right-hand corner, you're seeing that on the whole, our actual staffing was about 77 FTE less than budget. Okay, you see that 2904.7 number. Okay. Our actual total budgeted expenses was almost right on at $163,000 more on a $291,000 million base. That's very small, obviously. Okay, but there's some offsetting things going on. Okay, so we were under budgeted in payroll taxes and benefits. We know that we've adjusted that for the following year, 18-19. But on the whole, staffing costs were very close. Certificated was a little under, classified was a little over, benefits were a little over, but offsetting things all in net, very, very close to budgeted. Okay, more on the staffing analysis. So this shows the relationship between the FTEs that the state allocates to us for the prototypical school model and what we actually hire for those same positions. Now, just right off the top, I want to tell you, and you'll notice, at KSD it says 2,077. Well, we clearly hire a lot. We have more FTE than that. So this is just the staff that are covered under state apportionment formulas, okay? This excludes anybody hired that's outside of that, okay? Couple things to note. We just had a teacher librarian speak, right? So it's apropos to the top column there, top right-hand column. You see that the district consistently hires and pays for more teacher librarians, guidance counselors, social workers and psychologists, and school nurses than the state funds. It's particularly pronounced for school nurses. You see there 17. You see a difference for classroom teachers at 33. Why is that? Okay, so two things. One is we don't staff to the 17-to-1 ratio or the class size of 17 that the state requires in part, or will require. In part, again, because the salaries that the state allocates to us are not the full amount that we pay teachers. So for every teacher, we're subsidizing at the local level to the tune of 10, 15, 20%. Okay, and then at the bottom, you see a grand total difference of close to 90 staff, meaning we are hiring 90 more people within that prototypical framework than the state funds, for an all-in cost of $50 million. Again, if you considered all the staff paid out a lap, staff paid out a special ed, but it would be a much larger number. But this allows an apples to apples for what the state says it funds versus what we fund for those positions. Okay, this is expenditures by object. Couple things to note here. First of all, as we noted, very close to budgeted amount overall, 0.24%, or about $800,000 more than the amended budget. But some offsetting things going on, as we noted. The 4,000 series payroll taxes and health benefits, we spent more than budgeted. Most of what's driving that is an increase in the retirement subsidy, the retirement withhold, like pension, as well as the rate for actual health benefits themselves. And then also contract services in the 7,000 series. You see we spent $1.7 million more. Yep. To the amended budget. Couple things going on there. And this is a good list of three to just kind of keep in your head. There's a lot of questions about contracted services. Running start payments, we continue to have more Running Start kids, and those payments to the colleges show up as contracted services. So we continue to pay more every year than we budgeted. That enrollment continues to chase, and we budgeted again for an increase, and it's a very popular program. But somewhat counterintuitively, the expense shows up as a contracted service. Homeless transportation, again, shows up in this line and is again something that continually exceeds the budget amount that the district has. And out-of-district placements in the special education, inclusive education place. Now, again, I always hasten to add there that in those cases where we're not out to save money on students with special needs, right? So it isn't an issue of saving money there, but just examining the efficiency of the models that we're using, make sure every kid's receiving exactly what they need. Okay, revenues. We collected 99.6% of what we anticipated in our amended budget. But again, some offsetting things happening. So in the 1,000 series, we collected less local property tax than we anticipated. And you remember our conversation from a few weeks ago. So we, for years in September, the district always collected somewhere in the range of, like 1.3 to 1.8, somewhere in there. And then this year it was like $700,000. So there was a pretty well-established pattern, and then there wasn't. And so that's primarily what you're seeing there on the 1,000 series. You're seeing an over-collection on the 4,000 series. Again, that has to do with LAP. We received more than we anticipated for LAP. And then in the 9,000 series, you see $3.2 million. This is what shows as a revenue transfer, which I'd like to talk about right now, to kind of take a moment to go over that and then return. Okay, so what that is are a series of technology and technology-related expenses that state law allows to be treated as capital expenses. And I'm going to read to you a couple of pertinent sections of the law and why it's treated as a revenue transfer as opposed to an expense transfer. Okay. So about 10 years ago, the law was changed with regards to how technology licenses can be handled by school districts. I'm just going to read you a brief excerpt from that law, and then we'll talk about what the law enables, the different kind of accounting choices that are associated with that, and then also what the board has authorized in the past, okay? So as it relates to the change in the law, the legislature recognizes that technology has become an integral part of the facilities and educational delivery systems in schools. Software systems are shifting from selling software as a one-time package to a license or an extended contract relationship requiring a subscription or ongoing payments. School districts must be empowered to respond to the changing business models in the software industry and be given flexibility and authority to use capital project funds to pay for licenses or online application fees. It is the intent of the legislature that these investments be deemed major capital purpose and are also permitted uses of the district's levies authorized under 8452.053. So what the law does is it says, okay, you may use capital project funds to pay for software. It's very clear. It's not subtle. It's very clear in the law. But what is subtle is there's two different ways that you can do it, okay? If the software is an initial expense of, suppose you start a new school, okay, and it is an initial expense of the starting of the school, you can treat that as a direct bill to capital projects. So it wouldn't show up as a transfer. It would simply show as an expense in the capital projects fund. If it is, as this notes, an ongoing subscription or expense, you can still use capital projects fund, but you must transfer the revenue from the capital projects fund to the general fund to do so. It is specifically enumerated in the law as to that procedure. And the only question is like, which one to treat which way? Is it a direct expense to capital or is a revenue transfer? So, I won't bore you with a recitation of the specific RCW, but it's specifically contemplated that there are these two types of expenses, initial and ongoing. It's not vague, it's very clear, and it dictates how you treat them depending on which one it is. All of those 3.2 are either technology licenses or technology-related expenses, okay? So that's the state law portion of it. Let's turn now to what the district has authorized, okay? So what matters here is the resolution, okay? The district's resolution for the technology levy. All districts that have a technology have such a resolution. They differ. Some of them are pretty vague. Some of them are rather specific. Kent's is rather specific. So Resolution 1429 authorized the technology levy that we are now closing. This is 1418 levy. And it enumerates in a fair amount of detail, actually, an unusual amount of detail, under Section 1 and Section 3, what the district may use these funds for. It's pretty clear that the person who wrote this resolution was cognizant of the law we just spoke about because it specifically lists the acquisition of hardware, software licenses, and other online applications for the foregoing systems, as well as the installation and all necessary appurtenances, equipment, fixtures, and furnishings. It goes on. And so two things. One is, what is that? It shows up as a transfer, but in effect it is a expense transfer, but you reflect it as a revenue going to the general fund for those expenses that are recognized as capital in statute. And then the second thing is, there's a question about what the board authorizes and when it authorizes it. So I called at least one other district. The interesting thing here is that your authorizing resolution has always authorized this. The district has just never done it. So software licenses is a specifically articulated approvable expense under Section 3. I see very little evidence that the district has done that, but it's, again, not vague as to the authority granted under this resolution. So I received a lot of questions, a lot of emails about this, and it really, I want to kind of harken back to our conversation from a few weeks ago about if there are things in the general fund that can be charged somewhere else, there ought to be an initial discussion about that, right? It's not the general fund, and basic ed within the general fund shouldn't be always the place of first resort, right? But the final thing, and again, I think it's something that we emphasize in the conversation, but for the betterment of the group here, I don't see this as a one-time thing. This is a change in practice for the district to begin to utilize the flexibilities that the law has allowed for software licenses, and the district has authorized for software licenses and associated costs. We would have done and did do them regardless of whether we finished positive or negative, and I anticipate continuing to do so in the future, I mean, to the extent that I'm making those decisions. So happy to answer any and all questions about that. The only reason that comes up is it shows as a transfer because of the way that the law dictates that, but there are a lot of other movements going on, particularly as we talked about categorical programs and everything else. I'm going to return to the PowerPoint at this point, finish that, and then answer any questions you have, just for flow. Okay, so it's all right. Okay, this was expenditure by object. A few numbers to look at here. This is a very interesting slide, and there's a couple telltale things here about kind of when districts go through difficult financial situations, what you see. So if you'll follow me along here. So this was kind of true all the way along this year, that you saw reductions in materials and supplies because these are things that you can control. You're not locked into a long-term contract, right? These are decisions that are fluid. The same was true for travel. We basically didn't do any travel. I mean, it was significantly down. And then the same for capital outlay. Contract services, for the reasons we just, the big three. Again, it's counterintuitive. People think about contract services and they think people are out just buying consultants. But the big driver, many of the big drivers are things you wouldn't necessarily associate. The running start contracts are a huge part of that. Out of district placements, again, a huge part of that. And to the extent that a lot of these contracts are indeed contracts for longer than a short period of time, you're locked in to some extent. There are certainly lots of things that don't fit that, but they tend to be the smaller dollar items. So even in a year where austerity was the guide, you still see a slight increase in contract services. With salaries, you saw a really infinitesimal decrease, which is not unexpected. That's pretty much what we expected to see, but an increase in payroll taxes and benefits, which we went over before. And we knew from this year that we were under budget in that. We have adjusted in the 18-19 budget for that. So overall, a little higher 17 to 18 in salaries and a little lower 17 to 18 in MSOCs, but huge offsetting things going on within MSOC in the way that we discussed. Okay. The revenue comparison, we took in more than we anticipated. A big driver of that was LAP and special ed. Legislature had made changes that were kind of going on concurrently with the original budget. This was before I was around, but this was not uncommon for a lot of districts that they received more than they budgeted in those areas. But you see local revenue going down and state revenue going up, and that will be a theme that continues for this year and the following year as well. Okay, enrollments. We had a great year as it related to the accuracy of the K-12 FT enrollment. I think the most accurate year that the Lisa's historical spreadsheet has on it. And so that was great. But again, you see Running Start. Our financial relationship with Running Start is a little different. We, as kids opt for Running Start, we get that money, we send it on, and we have a small indirect that we keep. But critical to get that that full-time enrollment piece as close as you can, and indeed, it was really very much spot on. But you see here, this is an interesting slide, that the gray line, which is 17-18, did not necessarily follow the same orange and blue curve, particularly as you got into May and June, which might have portended just a bit. Actually, this wouldn't even if you extrapolated this out, it wouldn't have predicted 700. But it didn't follow the normal spring curve. Still very, very accurate. But again, when you're in a year that's super tight, 20, 30 kids matters from a revenue standpoint, right? So, okay, so I have some detail slides that I'm not intending to go over in great depth unless there are questions, but I've provided, I did get to talk about the capital transfer there, but I provide one for each fund. The only thing that's probably noteworthy is that the capital fund, capital projects fund, which is your first slide, ending the year with a $35 million fund balance. That is pre-bond sale, right? So the bond sale occurred in October so that will reflect in this year. And then you will be, I don't want to confuse your years, but we are making a change to the debt service fund. This is 17-18, but for 18-19, we're recommending a different debt service collection number that you'll see in a separate resolution. Okay, and then I wanted to go over the bond update. The bond ratings are useful in the sense that they give it to you like it is. There's no sugarcoating, and it's a good, helpful check on how others are seeing us from the outside. And so I actually find them very helpful because they don't mince words, in terms of where you're at. So the last bond rating we got was associated with our last bond sale, which was last month, okay? Our bond rating didn't change. It's A1 with a negative outlook. If you look at districts that have an A1 rating, it's mostly very small districts. If you're a larger district, you have a larger tax base, your credit rating should generally be larger than that, okay? So why? What were our credit strengths? Well, we're a large and growing tax base in the Seattle metropolitan area. That's a huge plus for us. We have manageable debt and pension liabilities. Credit challenges. We have a weak financial profile in the sense that we have low level of reserves. That should be obvious at this point, right? We are, I believe, the only district in the state that relies on an interfund loan at this point. We may not be the only one at the end of this year. But again, that's something that a creditor is going to look at. And our increased dependence on state aid adds budget complexity. So even though we got more state money, it's also reducing our local levy money. And, speaking of four-year outlooks, you look at the state's four-year outlook in terms of their ability to sustain the revenue infusion that they made. They have a whole set of considerations there. So when a rating agency is looking at school districts that become more and more dependent on the state's ability to maintain that high level of funding, there's questions that are raised there. So the negative outlook was based on the fact that, we may improve marginally in the short term, but we have challenges in front of us, which are clear. Factors that could lead to an upgrade: substantial improvement in reserve levels and liquidity, and demonstrated ability to deliver structurally balanced financial results. None of those should be surprises to you, but I think it's a good outward check of how somebody else sees the district, not necessarily how we see it. We were fortunate in the sense that we caught the market at the right time to get a pretty good deal on our bond, but at least that's how the rating world is seeing Kent Public Schools. So I am happy to answer any of your questions. I think the final note I would say is that, and I mentioned this to Dr. Watts just earlier today, the work just gets harder, right? I mean, going into 1920, we've got a whole nother set of decisions and discussions to have about avoiding deficit spending. Independent of how much fund balance there is, avoiding deficit spending really is going to be the gold standard for the district moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Okay, I'll start from my right to left. Director Strauss, would you like to start?
Sure, can we go back on slide 6? The one that caught my eye that you didn't talk about was the 7,000 series.
Sure.
The other instructional programs, that was quite a bit higher. Say a little bit as to, we were almost 212% higher than normal in that one. Wondering if it was things got moved into that weren't normally there, or?
Yeah, I see what happened is, I mean, the original budget was 3.4, and then it got dropped by a factor of 7. Is that, we're looking at the same one? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it was overexpended as to the revised budget, way underexpended as to the adopted budget. A lot of movement there. I could maybe have Lisa give it a shot if you want.
Yeah, so actually this slide is a good example of where you would want to refer to the adopted budget column rather than the amended, because during the amended process, we pulled out of the budget a lot of our contingency amounts. And so that's what's reflected here in the decrease of budget from the 3.4 million down to 500,000. Program 7,000 is that's typically where we budget for the majority of our contingencies. So that was one of the largest components of of the revision made in the amended budget process, which again wasn't officially adopted, and so those amounts don't show up in Skyward. So, but it's important, when you're doing a comparison and looking at, variances from budget to actual, you want to keep that in mind on what you're actually looking at.
Ms. Tyler, could you explain to the public what contingencies?
Oh, sure. Contingency is there are amounts that you budget for the unknown. So you would never want to budget to the exact penny. You want to give yourself enough capacity and just excess capacity really to take care of things that, again, are unknown. So if you don't end up needing the contingency, great. But, let me just throw out an example. Let's just say, and we do build in contingency for facilities use. So let's just say we had a significant issue, a fire at one of our schools. Well, we typically wouldn't budget for that as a normal event, but we would budget capacity for that, in those instances where something might happen, just like you would do with your personal. You kind of set aside something in case something happens. So that's the whole concept of a contingency. And if you look at our budgets over the course of the past several years, it's usually a pretty constant or consistent amount that we budget for. It's millions of dollars, but in retrospect to the amount of our total budget, it's a reasonable amount. $3 to $5 million off the top of my head is about what we budget for in contingency. And we do budget on both sides. We budget revenue contingency as well as expenditure contingency, so that's in balance.
Thank you.
I had one more on slide 11. The capital outlay was quite a bit lower there. So were there things that we consciously decided not to do, or?
Let me see, again, off the top of my head, based on our spending controls that were in place this past year, a lot of the capital expenditures that were included in our adopted budget did go unspent. And in previous years, or in the previous year, 16-17, there was, again, this is off the top of my head, there was a $300,000 equipment purchase in CTE. So, that wouldn't be a normal every year occurrence. So that's part of the explanation for that. But again, capital expenditures were one of the, similar to travel. It was pretty much shut down for 17-18, unless it was really needed.
Thank you.
So our definition of capital expenditures wouldn't include software, it would be just equipment at this point. That's how we're defining it. Is that right?
Sure.
Yeah, so there's a difference between that, the description of capital outlay and major capital expense that you might associate with the capital projects fund, which came up earlier. I think maybe Jewel took you through that, but I think the two terms have occasionally been conflated, but capital outlay has a very specific definition that is not apropos to the capital projects fund. It is a general fund parameter.
Director?
Three centered questions. One stays on here, kind of looking at that same other instructional programs. And you don't have to answer it now. If I look at that line, I know it's small, but if I look at the amended budget and I kind of back out where we were at before this month, we were basically on budget, $500,000, but then spent double that in the last month, spent another $500,000. So I want to understand kind of what that was. That came in there, you know, was it overspending a single budget? Was it just expenses that had no budget, whatever that was? I know it's small, but it just seems, when the current month in there being that it's half of the full year budget.
Sure.
Seems a little unknown.
Yeah.
And so I just want to know more about that. And you may not have those details, so that's I guess the takeaway that I want. Then you mentioned this, it's on like 7, 9, and 11. I think slide 11 shows it the best way I want to see it, which is payroll taxes and expenses being higher. And I just want to kind of, what is specifically changed? And I want to understand whether it was controllable, non-controllable. I mean, payroll tax withholding rates, we don't control that. So what happened from a both prior year and budget standpoint that changed that we now have more expense?
So the two components of payroll taxes and benefits that typically change every year and change in terms of increasing are our retirement contribution rates and health benefit costs. The payroll taxes we know are pretty set and standard, and they haven't really changed much recently, to my recollection. But last year, retirement rates increased, I want to say about 9%, okay? And the health benefits, I don't have that as a percentage, but those employer rates increase, again, every year, depending on the plans.
So basically as a proxy for general health costs to cover our employees.
Correct.
And then we're talking about, you say the, I guess, retirement rate. I just trying to figure out where that rate comes from. Is that a rate of people, or is that something that's told to us, this is what we have to reserve?
It's a pension rate, and it comes from the state.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's set.
So given that it comes from the state, did this disproportionately affect Kent from a rate standpoint, or was this something that was across the board?
It's a consistent rate that all districts use.
Okay. Then, back on slide 10, can I get into the conversation that we had on the 9XXX funding sources? Talking about a change in practice from our standpoint. And if you don't have the details now, because it's more of a process question of, we actually talked about this in general without numbers previously.
Yep.
And I just want to know how do we go about identifying what those items are? I assume it's not one item, it's multiple items across whatever it is. How do we go about identifying what is this tech-related licenses, how we spent them, and then how do we identify where they are across, I don't know, cost center, whatever that answer is.
Sure.
And then actually come up with something to do.
Sure. So probably three things. First of all, talk to a couple of their districts in terms of what's out there. What's the practice for this? What are some methodologies? But the biggest part of it doesn't pertain to other districts, it pertains to district, which is the wording of that levy resolution is important. It's like what is in there and what isn't in there. And the wording of the law is important in terms of how you treat it. So the levy, Give me a second. So the levy resolution has a section 1 and a section 3. And the section 1 is kind of the thematic section, and then section 3 kind of lays out in detail what. But section 1 talks about an integrated technology system for instruction and research. Okay? So those are two guideposts right away. So any technology license that's like, purely administrative or whatever doesn't fit the mold of the resolution, right? So an example would be like, I don't know, like talent ed, where you're like, people get hired on, whether it's a software license. That doesn't fit kind of the theme of section 1, right? So that kind of purely central office versus pertaining to instruction and research is a key distinction.
Yeah.
And then section 3 does a lot of work for you. It really kind of, A through F, lays out, what the board authorized. So there's not a lot of guessing to go on. And it talks about the machines themselves, both for classrooms and libraries, presentation stations. E is acquisition of hardware, software licenses, and online applications. I've already read you the F and E, but the installation of all necessary, and then the training related to the installation of the foregoing. So as I understand it, districts have different levy resolutions, so it matters. And so I know some districts, but there are districts that pay for all of their licenses, all of them, out of the capital project fund. This resolution doesn't send that signal, so I hope that's helpful. That's kind of a guiding.
I guess more, and again, you can prep me with the individual process later, but like, how do we identify that number per se? Because it actually happens over several months, a large number. The last one, how do we identify that number? How is that information pulled together and verified? And you may not have it now, but that's sort of kind of what I'm verifying is just, we're doing this now, we expect to do it at any point in the future.
Yep.
I'm also thinking, is there a process improvement where we can know how much this is as it, I don't know, accrues quarterly or something like that, so we can be advised of it?
Yes, there could be. But I think the point I want to emphasize is this is not a extremely unusual thing. There are some districts that pay for some of their licenses, some districts that pay for all their licenses, particularly the larger districts, certainly districts that have tech levies. But that law changed for a reason. There were districts that were seeking to change that law for the very reasons discussed. And so I think there was a practice. There were, to be fair, there were a lot of practices over a long period of time that I don't question. Truly, given the facts at the time, it might have made sense not to do that. It might have made sense to transfer general fund money for capital projects. It might have made sense to do a lot of these things at that time. But given our situation, and this is not the first time we've had this conversation, I don't think it's a good strategy for now and in the future.
Okay. Thank you. That was all mine.
Okay. I'm looking at slide 14 for the FTE enrollment analysis. What would you refresh us on what our September enrollment was, what our October enrollment was, and what we projected it was going to be?
Are we talking about 18-19?
Yeah.
Okay. So, so we are, if you'll, I don't have the specific number in my mind, but in October, we were down, I believe, FTE. I keep getting emails from people about head count. It's FTE. Year to year, we were down, I think, 707. And then we went down a little bit more in November. not drastically, but a little bit more. So based on November, we didn't make a new recommendation as to the projected AAFTE for the budget, right? Because it was pretty much right in the, it wasn't radically different, because you could adjust every month, I mean, you could be, but I think 700 down is a round number for where we're at year to date. And then the second part of your question, I'm sorry?
I'm looking at the line graph here.
Yes. And this line graph is for 17-18.
Right.
Right.
But I'm looking at the trend. I mean,
Yes.
they all start September, they
Yes.
go up in October,
Yes.
they stay flat, and then they all start down.
Yes.
But last year, it took a bigger dive than the other two years.
Yeah, it did. Ironically, we were the most accurate we've ever been in 17-18, right? So we had confidence that the cohort survival model for 18-19 was, we just had the greatest result from it. And I think, as we've discussed before, we had an independent demographer look at it as well. Same demographer that a lot of neighboring districts. And what materialized was way lower than his low. They give you a range. So clearly there's kind of a regional economic dynamic at play that it's not about a specific school or,
Right, okay. Thank you.
Ross covered my question.
Good.
Okay, I have a few questions. Some were covered. Yes, going back to the first of the historical chart
Do you have
on unreserved.
Can you give me a number?
I think 3, maybe 2. Keep going.
That one?
No, it's a chart, the historical chart on unreserved, undesignated funds.
Oh, the outlook?
Yeah,
That one? Okay.
The one before.
Yeah, this is forward thinking.
No, the one before.
That one?
That one, yes.
Okay.
Yes. So this is the ending fund balance, expected fund balance, 8-year comparison. But do you have a chart on the unassigned to minimum fund balance, a chart similar to that? So, because when our fiscal recovery task force
Yeah.
comes on board,
Yeah.
we're going to be paying attention to that
Yes.
and not this, the ending fund balance.
We can create that,
Yeah.
just
So
like this.
I'd be interested to see.
Yeah.
My particular question on that is, when was the last time we met our policy 6002? I'm curious.
I think I can tell you that, actually.
Okay.
Well,
Undesignated,
wanna-
unreserved.
yeah, I think I know the answer, but I want to just be able to look it up. So if I can respond to.
Okay, yeah, I'm interested in that. And let's see, slide 8 on staffing analysis. One of the key metrics the the strategic planning committee talks about is family involvement, and I see we don't have anything budgeted. So how?
Well, if I may.
Yeah, please.
So a little bit difference there. So the state, in its prototypical school funding formula, has a position specifically called Family Involvement Coordinator. It doesn't mean that we don't have other positions in the district that engage in family involvement. Yeah, it's this specific title in the S270, whatever that. So I wouldn't want to say that we have no staff that engage in family involvement. It's really more about that specific title.
Okay. All right, thank you. Slide 8, I'm just confused about how much is money is going away. Total salaries funded locally is 50 million.
So, and again, it's important to reiterate this point. So we have a lot more salary than that is paid for by funds other than state. But just as it relates, remember, this is only the 2,000 staff that we fund that parallel to a position in the prototypical school model, right? It's the only way you can really do like an apples to apples comparison. So just for these so-called basic ed positions, we hire and pay $50.5 million more than we are funded for through the prototype.
Okay, got it. All right, and we went over other financing sources. Slide 11, we went over, okay. So slide 14, actually Karen got that question. 15, we talked about why was the 16-17 capital budget beginning fund balance so low?
I think because that was the year.
Was that the year?
Oh, that's going back in history a bit. Wasn't here, but do you know?
Okay.
It just
yeah,
reflects the cycle of the bond
770.
sales and the bond projects.
Yeah. That was just before the sale of the 16 bond, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Did you want to?
Okay, we can get
Yeah, so that was the beginning fund balance for 16-17, not the ending fund balance. So
Just the beginning
that means
fund
that
balance,
in the summer of 16, it was really low, which I guess makes some sense because the 16 bond was the,
And you see that it reflects the bond sale of 82 million.
yeah.
Okay, all right. And I think that's it. And on the transportation fund, slide 18, there's 300,000 less in expenditures.
Slide, did you say 18?
18, yes.
And I'm sorry, your question?
300,000 less in expenditures. Transportation fund. What are we looking at? Yeah, 2017.
Say something?
Yeah, sure. So that is strictly a function of the number of buses that we purchase, and so they're all on a replenishment cycle.
Okay.
You know, so that's just in budgets for the number of buses that are needed and will be turned over in any given year.
Okay, thank you. I think those were all my questions. All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Eric. Ms. Tyler, thank you. Right,
Am I staying up here?
Ben, you're going on to, sorry, extension of general fund budget for 2018-19.
Okay, so what you have in your packet is both a copy of the actual F200 manual, so that's the thing that looks like an Excel worksheet, and then you also have the resolution, which is what you actually vote on, okay? And just to remind, not just the members, but members of the audience that, so this is the culmination of the 2 prior work sessions, so I'm not redoing the whole presentation that you have had both on the why and then the how much. Just to reiterate the key points here, that effectively what you're doing in this budget extension is you are authorizing an increase of expenditure authority of the general fund from 378.1 to 386.2 million. For all the reasons that we went into, both the collective bargaining impacts, the enrollment impacts, variety of other things. So without this, what would happen is if we didn't do this, eventually, at some point late in the year, we would exceed, from a spending standpoint, the authority of the board given. We'd run into a ceiling. This heightens that ceiling, given the changes that happened between the time that you adopted on, I think it was August 22nd, and today. Given that we had such exhaustive work sessions, I'll respond to questions, but I asked that the work session materials were provided to you, so you have access to them, but I didn't see the percentage and going over them again. So unless there are additional questions, I'm prepared for any of your additional questions.
So Daniel, can I start with you? Dr. Harvey?
No, this is as expected.
Yeah. All right. All right. Thank you, Ben.
Okay.
Okay. We will then move into 4.0, our public hearing. And 4.01, public hearing for extension of general fund budget for 2018-19. We will recess the board meeting for a public hearing to receive comments on the 2018-19 budget extension. Any person wishing to submit written or spoken comments regarding the proposed budget may do so at this time. Are there any comments?
Hi, my name's Kent Smith. I'm a professor of accounting at Central Washington University. I'll be speaking on some other later items. I wasn't planning on speaking, but I did print out the 2018 and 2017 budgets before coming, just so the public knows who sometimes struggles with understanding budgets. This is basically a net change of $16 million net to the bad for the budget, but a lot of districts did something similar to this if they didn't have the salaries in their budget. So in the North Shore District, they kind of built their budget with that in there so they didn't have to do an extension. So that's just trying to get like the landscape of this. It's not necessarily surprising, is I think a comment, but it does tighten things up. I guess I would wonder if those numbers are, which numbers are reflected in those fund balance numbers getting worse, the extension numbers with the contract in them or this original numbers. The other piece is on this transfer that was helpfully beginning to be explained in the capital projects. It's not in your approved budget. And so if you want to adopt that process, and about 2 out of the 3 districts I saw in the region that do this, North Shore, Bellevue does it to like 18 million, Lake Washington about 9 million. However you find that number, I think is really important. But if you wanted to do that in a budget extension, you could consider that doing in one extension rather than another. Some districts don't like to do multiple extensions, but I think you can change your budget every time you want or need to do that. But if you want to do that all at once, you could wait and do this later, but since you have this one here, but your current budget for 18-19 does not have this capital projects transfer back to the general fund. So if you want to add that in as a new policy, and like I said, 2 out of 3 districts I look at large and the ones in your area are doing that, you probably want to do a formal board approval to make that change. It's not in the budget that you have right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay.
And as a non-expert at budgets, my question would be, this transfer that's occurring was not in the original budget. We were supposed to be balanced without an additional transfer. So it seems to me as if this is hiding the fact that we're not at the place we thought we would be. We are using money from a different pot to balance when we were supposed to be balanced without that additional money. Am I incorrect? Are we only allowed to?
Statement, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
So that's the general impression of your policy.
Thank you. All right. Are there any other questions, please? Okay. Okay, now I would like to ask for a motion to close the public hearing.
I move that we close the public hearing.
Okay, is there a second, please?
I'll second.
Any other discussions or questions? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. All right, the hearing is now closed. All right, 5.0 Board of Directors Discussion and Approval, Resolution Number 1554. I'd like to ask a board member to make a motion to approve Resolution Number 1554.
I move that we approve Resolution 1554, extension of the general fund budget for 2018-19.
All right, I'd like to call for a second.
I'll second.
All right, a motion has been made to approve Resolution Number 1554, extension of general fund budget for 2018-19. Are there any questions or discussions? Okay.
No, sorry. It was just
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. Motion passes. 5.02. I'd like a board member to make a motion to approve Resolution Number 1553.
I move that we approve Resolution 1553, certification of the 2019 excess property tax levies.
All right, is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, I'd like to, a motion has been made to move Resolution Number 1553, certification of 2019 excess property tax levies. Are there any discussions or questions?
Yeah, we'll just talk about the findings and determinations A through C. Changes happen, and so I think we're just approving changes. You talked about why each one, let's
Yes.
talk about the debt service fund.
Yes.
Specifically,
Yep.
why it decreased.
Okay, I got it. Hold on a second. So there's actually a couple of key points as it relates to, I apologize, you caught me slightly unawares here. I have a copy of it here somewhere. So these are all calendar year certifications. There's a couple things going on, and I'm glad you asked because this year is unique in some respects, not just for Kent, but for all school districts. This year, we have been advised by the ESD to go ahead and certify the amount approved by the voters, even if that amount is ultimately larger than $1.50 per thousand yields. Reason for that being they changed the policy in terms of the calendar year valuations that they use to determine the collection. So every district's kind of caught in between a little bit because you don't know exactly what your collection amount is going to be. So what you should see there is a number that's like 44 million and a little bit more, like $125,000. Yes, the reason for that is the 44 million is the authorized calendar year collection for calendar year 19. The $125,000-ish, sorry, I don't have that right in front of me. I think it's sitting over in my chair, is the, they're called administrative reimbursements that every district gets that allows them to to increase their ask, their approved collection.
Yep.
It's usually a very small amount. This year, again, it was very small, but I looked back and you have been taking these resolutions every year for many, many years, and there's always been some amount of residual administrative reimbursement gets added on. The debt service fund, you see a pretty significant change for calendar year 19 on the debt service fund. We finally sold that bond. We'd structured maturities in such a way that we know what the debt schedule will be. And so the 36,
Yeah, went from
36 million.
50.85 million to 38 million.
Yes, 38 million is basically the amount of the debt schedule now that we know, based on the actual sale. When we did the first budget, we hadn't sold or necessarily knew exactly how we would structure or how much we would sell. So, and that number's been verified by our financial advisor, the $38 million. So that's also good to go. And then I think, is that it? And then
There was another one on there, but again, it was a very small change. I think it was like $12,000. I think it was more of like, we went from 50.85 in the debt service fund, which was an estimate to begin with.
Correct.
But now this $38 million is
Correct.
a finite number since we've sold the bond.
Right.
For calendar year 19's debt service
right,
cost.
that's right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Ben. Any other questions, discussions? No. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. All right, motion passes. We're up to 5.03, resolution number 1555, out of endorsement waivers. And I'd like to ask for a board member to make a motion for resolution number 1555.
I move we approve Resolution 1555 out of endorsement waivers.
Is there a second, please?
I'll second.
All right, a motion has been made to approve resolution number 1555 out of endorsement waivers. Are there any questions or discussions?
Sure, please, if you would. Thank you. Because we have a long list here, I just want to make sure this is the list of people currently teaching when they need an out of endorsement waiver to basically continue what they're already doing or where they plan to go. Do we expect this list to grow and thus have to do this again at some point in the future, or this is mainly our start of the year one-time thing?
Yeah, this is the start of the year one time, and the reason we're bringing it to you now is because we wanted to make sure every teacher was placed so that we could only bring it to you at one point in the year. Every teacher on here is on a plan to receive their endorsement.
Are there plans differing in length?
Yes, and each plan is quite different. Some have to just test, some actually have to take courses, and so the plans do alter. If, for some reason, they move back into their area of certification, they would no longer need the out-of-endorsement waiver.
That was all. Thank you.
All right, I'd like to ask for a vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. All right, motion passes. We're up to 5.04, inclusive education out-of-district placement contracts. And I'd like a board member to make a motion, please, to approve.
I move that we approve the inclusive education out-of-district placement contracts.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, a motion has been made to approve inclusive education out-of-district placement contracts. Are there any discussions or questions?
Yes, please. Which is my standard anytime we were doing an out-of-district placement with a specific Heartspring in this case for one student. I just want to understand, is this a new vendor? How long have we used them before? Has this student been in this program before? And actually, let's start with that.
I'm always anticipating those particular questions. Yes, certainly this is a contract that is being re-upped. So again, this student has been at this facility. And without getting into too much confidentiality, this particular this is for one student, 16-year-old, and with some very significant needs. And I can certainly have conversations about those particulars, but again, due to confidentiality. There is a ratio for this child to be supported with 3 to 1, so 3 service providers for one child.
Can you?
And I can speak to the facility itself. Just by coincidence, I am aware of this facility just because of my former position. We also had a child at this facility. There's not very many in the United States that deals with very low cognitive, nonverbal, sign language, and severe behaviors, both. We call them SIBs, those self-injurious behaviors that are truly remarkable and significant.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And it's residential too, so this is obviously someone who's staying in there year-round. Thank you. Okay.
That's all.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? All right, I'd like to ask for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. Motion passes. 5.05, point of sale system proposal. I'd like to have board member make a motion, please.
I move that we approve the point of sale system proposal.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, a motion has been made to approve point of sale system proposal. Does the board have any questions or want to discuss?
I do. I appreciate the talking about how long this process has been going on, February 2018, and a team of district personnel that looks like it covers the right functional areas.
Yeah.
I kind of want to get on. I have no idea who led that team or what their official report was. I don't know if you have that or if you know who that person was. I'd like to hear from them if possible. They didn't know this before tonight, so they may not be here, but just understanding how is this the best way, how is this the best system to meet what we need?
Yes.
And, this is a 8-month process.
Yeah.
So kind of understanding, like, what happens if we don't do it? Are there better systems out there if we take this longer, whatever?
Sure. Yeah, so you'll have to stop me because we could talk about this for a very long time, but
Sure.
this was, so there are legions of office managers and cashiers out there who would love to come to the board meeting and tell you about the deficiencies in our current system.
Right.
We have a kind of a 90s era software called Keystroke that is not supported anymore. We don't know of any other districts that use it in the way that we use it. And it has, and you might see it come out in the paperwork that my team helped develop here. It is a source of inefficiency and frustration for kind of a core business, not central office-wise, but in the schools.
Yeah.
So, you go to a football game at French Field and you don't have exactly 650 or whatever it is. With this system, you swipe. Most of the districts in the state use this system, so their support is excellent. They're local, and so they went through and evaluated all of the major players in this field with an eye towards, there is an upfront cost, but what are we committing to long term,
right,
and what are we saving? And I can't, again, there are people who would love to come and talk to you about this, but the amount of human capital that is spent kind of manually prodding this thing to do basic functions that Keystroke is built to do, does in a lot of districts across the state, it just became evident through the evaluation process, some of which I was here for, some of which I wasn't. This spans back quite a ways. Across a whole range of needs. There are things that we plan to use this for right away, and there are things that we could make it compatible for down the road if we need to, but we're the only district that we know of using what we use right now. And this software that we are proposing is the one that is the most used in districts across the state. And so if our clients or our schools, our parents, pay for a sweater, you want to go to the ball game, you got any of these small transactional, this allows you to pay for all your kids in one transaction. It allows you to, it's just very streamlined for the purposes in which it was created. And right now we operate on 3 or 4 kind of individual systems that are ostensibly electronic, but they're very manual in the sense that you have to kind of prod them to do, there's a lot of manual process in allowing an electronic transmission for the current system. And then if it goes down, you're on your own. So my team feels very strongly about it. It was one of the things that came out of the strategic planning process in finance. Okay. And they'd love to come talk to you as well as many, many office managers across the district. So.
I guess how soon, if we do this now, how soon would this be up and running?
So just had a meeting about that a couple days ago. So they're thinking that there's a data migration process that has to happen that would likely happen in December, kind of with the hope that in the month of December and then through like winter break, you would be able to kind of launch into what isn't quite second semester, but the calendar year 19 for most of the major functional parts of it. Everybody that's involved is very excited and feels like it's very long overdue. So,
okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
sorry.
Yeah.
How did it fit into, I mean, was this a budgeted expense as we look at this year's budget?
Yes, it is budgeted for.
Ben, it says that it's May 17, 2017 was the agreement. Was that a wrong date?
Is that the agreement template that's in your packet? Yeah, so what until we're customers, they basically give us the boilerplate agreement to review. We haven't entered into a contract because you guys haven't approved it yet, obviously. So that is an example.
Sure, yeah.
That is an example of the contract that a district would enter into if the board approves. And it's less than $75,000, but we wanted to tell this story because it's a very client-focused thing. Like, this is something that schools have been waiting for and will love to see.
Are we still paying for keystroke, did you say?
In a lot of indirect ways, we pay a lot for keystroke. We really do.
But
Schools are really, is there anybody in the audience that would like to talk about keystroke? I mean, in one way or another, somebody has had a frustrating encounter with keystroke. If you have 4 kids in the system and you're going in individually for each of them and paying different fines, and then it goes down, and then we don't have any support, and it's just a very antiquated technology for a pretty core business function.
Yeah.
I guys want to kind of, how much more, if we approve this today, would we have to pay keystroke until we're done with them?
See, I don't think that we pay support for keystroke. We have kind of taken on in the IT department and kind of frankly ad hoc in finance, some of the team trying to kind of figure it out. It's not supported anymore. Yeah. And there aren't any districts that we're aware of that still use it. And the thing I wanted to note is that the cost you see is the upfront cost. There's the only ongoing reoccurring support cost is the $6,900. But there's a big lift initially in terms of training people, migrating all the data from the existing system to the, really, there's a lot of people that would be very pleased by this.
You're good, thank you.
Anyone else? All right, hearing none, no more discussions, questions. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. Motion passes. Okay, we are up to our 6.0 consent agenda. And before we get into discussions, there is someone who'd like to speak to 6.06, the Gear Up Grant. Shannon Jeffson Hernandez, please.
Shannon Jepson Hernandez, Mill Creek Middle School, 620 North Central Avenue, Kent, Washington. I'm just want to be just a little bit more information on this, and so I was requesting that you could share that before you finalize any consent. This looks like a pretty positive thing at $535,000 per year over 7 years. Specifically, what I'm looking to understand, though, is how will this be distributed equitably within the schools? How is it deciding what schools get that? What are the intentions of accepting this grant? What added work does this equate to? For example, I've seen grants before that we've received, and there were, between transitions of staffing or whatever it might be, people drop the ball here and there, loss of funds. And so, you know, when you have an opportunity like this, I just want to make sure there is actually a really credible plan in place to guarantee these funds are used appropriately. And then when will it be initiated? And how will it be tracked? And who will be responsible for appropriately monitoring these funds? And how will that be reported here? So just things to consider. Thank you very much.
This is a good time. I don't know how we want to do this. Do we want to go through the process and then during discussion have it responded to?
I could say we could
We'll
ask
respond
if anybody wants to pull anything from the consent agenda.
So why don't we pull the 6.06 and we can answer whatever we can answer.
So you want to pull 6.06?
Yes, 6.06. Anybody else?
I like 6.05.
And Okay, is that it? All right. So I'd like to ask board member to make a motion to approve the consent agenda minus 6.05 and 6.06.
I move that we approve the consent agenda less 6.05 and 6.06.
Is there a second?
I will second.
All right. Motion has been made to approve the consent agenda minus 6.05, 6.06. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. Okay, motion passes. All right, 6.05, Karen, please.
Yeah, just having gone through the FAFSA process with two of my mentees, I know how involved it is, and I'm wondering how this is going to be addressed in the different schools, and who's going to be following up, because I know that as a mentor, I was the one who did this process. The parents weren't involved, whether they were not interested or didn't understand, but I was the one who did it. So there are going to be times when we don't get parents involved, and I know when we've got communities in schools, and we've got site managers, they're good at pushing that, but we've got a lot of schools that don't have site managers for communities in schools. So how are we going to make sure that this is actually effective?
So both of these, so I'm going to answer that and kind of talk about both of these a little bit and then focus on them separately again. They both fall into an interestingly weird space for Kent School District, where we are not the fiscal agent of either one of these. So an external agency applied on our behalf, and we are co-sharers of the funds and access to the dollars. So for example, with the FAFSA Challenge dollars, the ESD is the fiscal agent, and they are actually partnering with Kent School District and with some of our community-based partners to galvanize, rally, inform parents about FAFSA and the opportunities to do that. And so we are strategizing on events, ways to train staff to help parents be able to do that process. So that is the plan, and we're developing that now. So it's not necessarily going to be placed in every school for the FAFSA Challenge. It is about creating events to help parents understand how to do that and how to train staff to help parents. Bilingual translation supports, because of the complexity of the fiscal documentation and all of that goes along with it, to be able to do that. And so, for example, one of the things that we've talked about is kind of galvanizing people around tax time. So when you already have your documents available and you're already kind of going through a complex process, let's also talk about FAFSA, and let's do that for your student because they will need that as well. And even though the challenge is addressing seniors, we've talked about getting that awareness out early, so it won't help us with the challenge, because the idea of the challenge, it's opened up to technically a city structure that happens to have a school district in it that has FAFSA completion rates that are lower than the national average. And so that's why Kent School District and the City of Kent area proper qualifies. And so if you raise it by 5 percentage points or higher, then, and you are in the top 10%, I think, of all of the challenged grantees, then you are awarded $125,000 to continue your work in the following year. So kind of in it to win it as we do that, because any dollars that we can use, especially for translation services and all of those other things, to get that word out. So that's how that will show up. And we are continuing to work with our partners to do that. But we felt like it needed to come to the board to inform, and it's, like I said, it's in an odd space because we're not the fiscal agent. We're not controlling those dollars. It's not going to show up in that way in terms of direct staffing. So we're not hiring staff to do this work. It is being incorporated into some of the other work, and actually the Assistant Director of Strategy and Innovation, it's one of the things that she's leading. So. Okay,
good. It's really important. I mean, there's so many kids who don't understand the importance of it or don't even think about it, and the time passes and the window closes, and then they don't have the access.
So we're trying to help that, and we're trying to think about all of those pieces. Like I said, language is a big one for us this go around, and with the sensitivities of the fiscal information and how to balance that. And so we're.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. Well, Dr. Harmon, can you answer the 6.06 gear up?
So I'll talk about it. I'll talk. I figured that there'd be some questions. So this is similar, a little bit different. So this one is completely reimbursable. So whereas we had a request for fiscal expenditures for training or some other pieces around the FAFSA, we could ask that of ESD and they would pay for it up front. With the Gear Up Challenge, it is a consortium. It's a federal grant. And so a consortium, the University of Washington applied for this on behalf of, I think, Auburn, Tukwila, Kent, and I believe Renton are the districts that are participating in Gear Up from the federal perspective. It's a 7-year grant. And the whole purpose of this is to start with middle schoolers and kind of follow them through a cohort of their, kind of through their graduation process and preparing for college, career, and life. And so it's gearing up for that post-secondary experience is the whole idea behind it. This one is reimbursable expenses. So in order to get the $535,000, we have to actually expend the resources in the year and then reimbursed from the fiscal agent, University of Washington, not us. So initially, when we were thinking about this work, there was a previous plan in place to invest those strategies and dollars around staffing and program of AVID. And a lot of that initial proposal in the grant when University of Washington submitted was around travel for adults to go attend AVID training. And so we're in the process of rethinking what that could look like and spending more of those, so a good half of the dollars annually were spent on AVID training for adults. And so rethinking that and what that could look like for using those expenditures for student experiences around college readiness, whether that's college tours, whether that is information about preparedness, access courses or access classes for prep for college entrance exams, any of those things, but rethinking what that could look like rather than it being an adult benefit, thinking about how we could use those grant dollars for student benefit. So we are developing that plan of how to expend that budget and what that will look like. There are some dollars for staffing, so that could be a piece. We've talked about having some centralized support for counselors. So Randy Heath takes on quite a bit, and one of those things that he takes on is supporting those counselors, but there's not a centralized counselor role. So not in terms of a supervisory factor, but kind of pulling that work together. So we're kind of exploring what those options could be. And also thinking about, so they're not, although they are separate grants applied for with separate purpose on our behalf and benefit, but how could we through Gear Up also benefit that FAFSA push? Because that's a component of having students be ready for college and career. So that's where we are with that, and you will hear more as we develop that plan, but wanted to get those before you because, like I said, we don't control those dollars, but they do impact Kent School District. So.
Okay. So the question specifically asked about equity, and so a question for me would be, are the buildings in any way communicating with whoever is making decisions?
So we're just starting that work of what the buildings look like. And so it's different because for middle schools, there's not a direct post-secondary link. So it's thinking about kind of what courses they're enrolled in and what that looks like, or where those students, as they move through high school, where they end up. And so it's kind of backing into looking at, well, what middle school were they in and what was that experience like? And then kind of pulling that data together as well. So we're just starting that work and that conversation to develop the plan. But it's heavily focused on starting with that middle school, the middle school cohorts, and moving them through as they move through high school. So it will be a joint conversation with middle and high schools. But the middle school is the start of this, and it's following the students as they move through their process or their academic career.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hart. Any other questions? All right. Hearing none, I'd like a motion to approve 6.05 and 6.06, please.
I move that we approve 6.05 and 6.06.
All right. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. A motion has been made to approve 6.05, our FAFSA grant, and also 6.06, the Gear Up grant. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. Motion passes. We're up to 7.01, our superintendent contract second opinion. This is strictly informational. The board is not taking a vote, nor is there a discussion, but we do have Ken Smith who would like to speak to 7.01.
I just wanted to say I think it's useful that you got a second opinion. I read the opinion and then I called the attorney to ask 2 follow-up questions that were not returned. One is the concept of a third-party beneficiary. And I talked to someone else who is a lawyer, does contract. I think that's an item that needs to be explored before you really close the matter. And then the second item is that there's the second contract that appears to have been signed outside of a public meeting. And I think you could get a legal opinion on whether how could that be valid, since that would be a violation of the Open Public Meeting Act. So I think the matter, you have some input on the Scrivener's errors, which I had asked someone else about, which is true, but another attorney I asked said that's not related in this case, and so there's other outstanding legal matters. So I would not consider this closed if I were you.
We are moving to 8.01, again, informational, no votes on this. August 2018 financial statement, and, well, are there any questions or discussions? No. Okay. Then we're moving on to, oh, yes, sorry, Ken, yes.
Thank you. So, as many of you know, I'm a professor of accounting and former school board member, and so I've been watching and tracking the events in Kent for since about April or late March. In April of the year, there was a citizen report that we put together to share information that was available from your publicly monthly statements, and we shared that with the board, and we've shared that publicly. And then I've been watching and concerned about the ability of the district to meet its promise to get to a positive fund balance at the end of this year, given the financial stress and the other things. It did not seem likely, and so was watching those numbers and have been listening and the repeated assurances. When the numbers came out over the weekend, my colleague John Kerpiers, who's a PhD candidate in government accounting at York University, looked at that, and we have determined that we don't think that this report is an accurate representation of the transactions that actually occurred. And we think it's problematic if the board is aware of this report and aware of the fact that it may not represent what actually happened. And so receiving that report and doing nothing about it, I think, is very problematic. A traditional monthly financial report is just in the process. It's not you want it to be accurate, but things can happen. This is the end of the year report. In the history for Kent over the past 10 years, your August report has always equaled your audit numbers. This $3.2 million transfer does not appear in your budget, and so the districts who use that process approve it in their budget. It's legally approved. It is, as the woman said earlier, taking money from some fund and putting it in a different fund. And your budget procedure 6001P does not give that authority to override that. The state accounting manual does not allow that. So I think it's problematic that this report has that transaction in there. And then in the report that my colleague and John and I wrote, we kind of go through the 7-step test by Albrecht et al. On fraud, and that's an F word, and we have to be very careful with that. But there are some indications that this statement could be deemed as an attempt to mislead for the harm or the financial gain of certain parties. And so that's a very serious matter, and if I were sitting in your seat, which I used to sit in, a seat like yours, I would put the kibosh and the hold on that report until you got the information. The information that Director Hardy asked for twice was not answered, which is what is the calculation of this $3.2 million? From an outsider who's seen organizations under pressure before, it looks like a number that was created in order to get to a positive fund balance. And so it is highly problematic. It's suspicious that the things that auditors look for, your auditor's going to look for it. So I encourage you to do that. And then last, I think you should get 2 full-time certified internal auditors. 6001P says you should have internal auditing, and the Great City Schools link that I shared with you benchmarks, and that's what it would be for a district your size.
Thank you. All right, those are the only communication. 8.02, Procedure 2410P, graduation requirements. This was a change in our policy and procedures. Well, this is particularly procedure. Any comments, discussions? Okay, hearing none. We are going to move into communications, communication from the audience, and those were the only cards we had. So we will move to our legislative update with Director Hardy, please.
I actually have a lot now, because we've been waiting because there hasn't been much going on, but now there is. Primarily because we've been waiting because of the elections that just finalized. So a lot of our state legislature was up for election. Some of our local legislatures were reelected. Some are new, as we have coming in. But then both groups that we've been a part of or can be a part of have put out legislative priorities. So this is the beginning of this kind of legislative priority session where groups, I'm gonna give you two from that we've been involved in, the State Board of Education, and then WASDA itself, which itself was the Washington State School Directors Association. Have their priorities, and some are very general in terms of being able to, this is what school boards or this is what communities can take to their legislatures. Some are very specific in terms of actual legislative bills that they're requesting or changes to laws that they're requesting. And so I want to give you an idea. If you recall, the State Board of Education, I gave this update, was seeking input. They kind of did a roadshow around the state. They concluded last week, I believe, in Vancouver, and kind of set their legislative priorities. And they're not available out there. They should be posted soon, but I wanted to share them with you, specifically around educational equity, school safety with a specific focus on mental health support, social emotional learning, and trauma-informed instructional models, early learning, increasing early learning support, and then special education funding. Noted that special education funding remains inadequate and is not currently fully funded. That's the State Board of Education's legislative priorities. WASDA, through process of all, 5 times however many school districts there are on a regional basis, put together legislative priorities. I believe there were upwards of 100 or more, but they kind of narrow them down and kind of group them together. And I want to put this out there from a WASDA standpoint. They have their conference, which is starting, and they're going to start highlighting these legislative priorities. They have the school directors come out in force starting at the beginning of the legislative session in January, and their priorities are similar: ensure student health and safety, talking about wraparound support services, support structured at the regional local level, be able to promote student success, a component of which is being able to attract, recruit, and retain high quality and diverse staff, a student-centered graduation requirement. One of the big changes, or one of the things from last year, was a new funding model. It's morphed into increasing funding model equity. I wanted to call out what the WASDA priorities are, including fully funding special education. There was a priority in there as all the school districts dealt this past year with challenges with budgeting and bargaining. The WASDA priority is actually to push to reestablish and fund a statewide salary schedule and then change the regionalization funding from the current model it is now, as well as a change in investment in public school facilities, specifically more from the state for school construction funding formula. Most of these are going to be available on either the State Board of Education or the WASDA site now. I would say our session, even though the legislative session has not started yet, our planning starts now as we seek to connect with regional leaders, school district or school directors from our area. WASDA organizes the Day on the Hill, which is usually in late January. We went last year to where we can go visit our existing and specifically our new state representatives and senators and advocate for what we think there are priorities. This is not a short session, regular session, so there's extended time to do that. And so I would say, hear this now, listen to this later, start reaching out as we form our priorities that we're going to bring to Olympia, as we also try to coordinate with local neighboring school districts. So more to come. I'll start talking more each other week in the legislative updates, especially while they're in session. But that is my report for today.
Thank you. All right, Dr. Watts, Superintendent report, please.
Yes. Vice President Strauss, members of the board, Ms. Howley, staff, community. I want to begin with one of the priorities that we discussed today regarding our next steps for planning, and that it has to do with our unique special program, iGrad. First of all, we have not finalized decisions on how iGrad will be situated next year. We do know this, however. iGrad will remain a school program in Kent School District. We continue to revisit these questions, however, and these are questions that have been posed by the community, they've been posed by our staff, our school board, and by me. My very own questions include, why does iGrad exist? Why and what do we want iGrad to be for our students who are enrolled? How well are our students performing as a result of iGrad? If students are performing as well as they could be, why? And if students are not performing as well as they could be, why not? How might we, as an organization, improve our supports and services to our iGrad students and to our staff who serve at iGrad? These are but a few of the many questions that we are asking, and answers to these questions, I realize they cannot and will not be derived from theorizing alone, but we start with data. And then we speak with our people, our staff, and we'll begin by sharing a presentation with our board to ensure that the right questions can be asked, the appropriate answers to those questions can be discovered. We have some tough decisions to make as an organization, we know that. The first question that we must ask in our heart of hearts is this: are we doing our best to address the needs of each and every student? And if we are not, why would we continue doing the same thing, hoping to get different results? Along with members of District Office support staff, I'm committed to listening continually to our iGrad community, to working with our iGrad community, our staff, our students, and our board toward a reasonable solution that supports increased student performance and improved resource management. This is our core business, and we will do it together. Second point of discussion is principal for a day. We've just moved out of October into November. October was National Principal Appreciation Month. Today we pay tribute to our principals. This is American Education Week, and our community partners and the strengthening of the relationships between the two took place today. Specifically, we celebrated American Education Week by inviting key members of our community to shadow several of our incredible school administrators for the day. The purpose was to allow our guest principals for a day to experience school from the perspective of a principal. And I shared with our principals who were able to join us. We invited several, and we'll continue to invite several, as well as school board directors who will be a part of this in the very near future. But this morning, the following principals were paired with respective leaders in our community, and each gained a very valuable, immeasurable experience and perspective, and agreed to partner in ways that would support improved empathy, which is the beginning of equity. How do our individuals, how do we learn how to walk in each other's shoes and understand what and how our lives are? Empathy then leads to equity, equity to excellence, and community, our three core values. Following principals were supported by guest principals. We'd like to thank all who were invited, and we thank all of our principals each and every day. Stephanie Behringer of Meridian Elementary School was shadowed by guest principal James Dupree, who is a retired educator and community member. Principal Miles Erdley at Horizon Elementary School was shadowed by guest principal Spencer Pan, who works and serves in our inclusive education team. Dr. Brian Patrick, Principal East Hill Elementary, was shadowed by Mr. Kira Bular, who works at a small coffee company called Starbucks. Principal Jim Shield, principal of Matson Middle School, was shadowed by guest principal Dr. Steve Smith, who serves on the Black Education Strategy Roundtable. Principal Doris Johnson at Meridian Middle School was shadowed by the Honorable Mayor Dana Ralph, City of Kent. And Shannon Nash, Meeker Middle School, was shadowed by Mr. Jimmy Brown, who is a KSD parent and community leader. I will conclude with one point of pride and purpose. Pride in that we have to congratulate the successes and pay homage to the work, the hard work that goes into achievement each and every day from our school community, from those who serve from a governance role as school board directors, from those who serve as a support role at the district office, those who serve in our trenches each and every day in our classrooms and in our schools, and those who serve within our community. Our graduation rates, I've spoken early and often about our 2018 four-year adjusted cohort rate, which in 2012 was designated as the recognized method of identifying how our students are being successful, graduating in 4 years. Now, there is an extended graduation rate. However, the adjusted four-year cohort rate is viewed by the federal government as the preferred method. 50 million students, 27 of whom are being served in Kent School District. 84%. The books are closed for the class of 2018. 84% of our graduates, of our students, I should say, who qualified for graduation were recognized as graduates from Kent School District. Now, again, that means that 16% were not. However, that does still stand as the highest percentage of our Kent School District four-year cohort rate since 2012. So what that means is, with the exception of our student groups identified as American Indian and Alaska Native through federal descriptors, with the exception of one student group, each student group increased their graduation percentage over the previous year. The three highest increases over the previous year, our Black African American student group increased from 70% to 79% in the previous year, this 2018. Our Hispanic Latino student group increased from 70% to 76%. And our student group who had the highest increase over 1 year are students who are identified, not defined, but identified as students who need additional supports and services to be even more successful. And we refer to our students in inclusive education as one of our most diverse sets of learners. From 40% 2017 to 54% qualifying for graduation in 2018, a 14 percentage point increase. Now, I've heard from several of our community members. I've heard increased sense of pride. I've heard skepticism. I've heard wonderings and curiosity, and I will tell you that it brings me great joy to understand that every student who did cross the finish line in the way in which we intend for them to, that it showed up. It also brings me some concern when our students are not addressed, or we're not addressing the needs in the way that we should. There's 1,620 students who graduated. That's the end size. So if 10% of that number is 162, and 1% is 16.2, and 0.1% is 1.62 students, technically. Every percentage point, every 0.1%, so let's put it this way. Every 0.2% equates to 3 students. Every student matters, each and every. If we think about our mission, our vision, our goal is to make sure that 100% of our students are able to not necessarily just walk across the stage, but they're able to be ready for college, for career, for life. That is our mission, that's our charge, and I stand ready to bring that to fruition, not by myself, certainly with everyone's support. Thank you. That concludes my report for this evening.
Thank you, Dr. Watts. All right, so let's do board discussion. We'll start with Director Daniels.
All right, so I've been out for a few weeks. I had to go support my daughter as she dealt with a health issue, and I actually got sick on the way back. So I've been out. So I've missed you guys, and I just want to thank you guys for being here. It's always good to see you. Always good engage with you, and I am very excited about the graduation information, and I want to thank you because I know it is a collective effort of all of us, and so you are much appreciated in the work that you do with our students, and so I just want to commend you and thank you for that, and I look forward to reaching that 16%, those 16% of kids. So I don't really have a lot. I think a few weeks ago before I had to take off, I did have the opportunity to go to the grand opening of an organization called RAP, which is Redeem, Assess, and I don't remember what the P is. And it's an organization that mentors at Mill Creek. They have a program, and they've been working with some students at Mill Creek supporting student groups. And I was really excited to learn about these smaller organizations that are really having an impact on our kids. So they had a grand opening right across from the police station downtown. So I would encourage you to stop in there at any given time. I've been there, just stopped in there today, as a matter of fact, and there are groups of kids just excited about going, excited about getting to work on their homework, their support. So it is a really, really great program, and I'm really excited that we do have it in our community to serve our kids. So I actually have talked to them about actually coming and presenting some of the things that they're doing because I'm really excited about it. So that is all that I have to say. I wish you all a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll see you soon.
I'm sort of in a similar situation as far as being out of it. The last 4 months I have been involved in a very stressful family situation that's needed a lot of support. So I haven't been able to get out since the start of school really to get to many things. I still continue to work with my mentors and my mentees. I'm hoping to get out to several of the drama productions that are being put on this month. So that's pretty much where I am at this point in time, and hopefully my family situation will get better.
Well, since we talked last, I want to remind us and everyone of the work that the board is doing on its own. Our fiscal recovery task force is out. Please apply if you're interested. As we have that going forward. And as we talk about, we're going into Thanksgiving is next week. We're getting into close to winter break. We've done a lot of work on the things that we always work on, that we have to work on, budget, superintendent goals. But that, as much as I'll be here to help push forward some of the things we want to do, policy review, which we're continuing, as well as pushing forward on the performance management audit, and then defining that scope and pushing forward on any additional financial audit. That is still something that we have and we can't lose sight of as we take this forward. And so that is my report.
Thank you. So I'm going to start first. Maya did have to leave, so she asked me if I would read her report. So first, she wanted to thank the Northwood leadership teacher Ryan Simpson. I observed a brilliant and at times entertaining debate on whether bullying is a cause of nature versus nurture. Second, she spent Saturday with our Region 2 board directors at North Shore School District, where they discussed statewide and District 2 legislative priorities, with comprehensive school safety ranked #1 as a priority for both. Special education and special needs came in second for District 2, followed by SEL, gun violence prevention, and fully funding the state employee benefits and pension. They also discussed a unique priorities of South King County versus the entire Region 2 districts, and whether we should separate North and South King County priorities due to our variety of needs. She also wanted to thank the Somali families for their hospitality and invitation to a wonderful discussion on education. The questions and answers regarding Somali students and family engagement were important steps to ensuring that all community members have a voice in education. She also wanted to thank the Kent Chamber for organizing the Girls First Robotics competition. She enjoyed the mock competition at the Amazon Fulfillment Center in Kent. She wanted to thank Attorney Mike Haynes from Haynes, Irvine, and Prothero, probably said that wrong, law offices for assisting the board with a second opinion of the superintendent's contract. And finally, she appreciated hearing from community members at all 3 district conversations. The board is following up on what we've heard, and many thanks to the Kent School District staff members who served as panelists and served on the communication team. We have a wonderful team at KSD, and I'm thankful for their commitment and professionalism to all. I did want to share that the board, we did do a policy review last week. We're going through our 6,000 policies. We read through first reading. We will have a second, probably a third reading on that. The board had lots of input, and we were looking forward to as we revise those. We also did an open public meetings training with our attorney, going over different things as part of our ongoing commitment for the board to get training as well. And this evening, before this meeting, we had, we went over our calendar as well as our board protocols and our, well, not so much our protocols, sorry, our communication plan and different ways of how we can improve communication with others. As I was reflecting before this meeting, and there's so many things going on in the world right now, whether it's fires or different things that are happening across the nation. I think it's good as we go into this time of Thanksgiving to really think about the things that we have and the things that we can appreciate. And I appreciate all the work that my fellow board members do, as well as everyone here at KSD. I know that as I work or talk and work with my son who's just starting in education, the different challenges that we don't necessarily hear about here, but that our teachers deal with every single day, and the depth that you care about your students. And we so appreciate the work that you do, and we do hope we don't have a meeting next week, so we do hope that you have a wonderful break for those couple of days and that you do enjoy and able to appreciate the things around you. So with that, we are adjourned for tonight. Thank you for attending.